It's for your own good, Mom. Those 6 words shattered my world as the psychiatric hospital security guards gripped my arms, dragging me through sterile white corridors that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Veronica stood behind them, her manicured nails clutching forged documents, her voice dripping with that fake concern she'd perfected over months of planning my destruction. What my dear daughter didn't know, what nobody in that room could have imagined, is that I had $980,000, hidden in 3 separate accounts, money earned through 47 years of night shifts, double overtime, and the life insurance from my beloved Thomas. And I was about to use every penny to destroy her life. My name is Odette Williams. I'm 74 years old. I spent half my life as a registered nurse, caring for the vulnerable, fighting for patients who couldn't fight for themselves. Now, I was one of them, trapped, medicated against my will, labeled as senile by the very person I'd raised with endless love. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated a woman who'd spent decades navigating hospital politics, who understood medical records, who knew exactly how these systems worked from the inside. I'm so grateful you're here listening to my story. You know, when I decided to share this, I wasn't sure if anyone would believe that a mother could be betrayed so completely by her own child. If you've ever felt invisible, discarded, or underestimated by people who should love you, please hit that like button. While I tell you the rest, if you could subscribe to the channel, it would help me reach others who need to hear that it's never too late to fight back. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far stories like mine are traveling, because what happened to me could happen to anyone. Now, let me tell you exactly how I discovered my daughter was planning to erase me from existence. It started 3 weeks before that horrible day at the hospital. I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made Veronica's birthday cakes for 37 years, when she arrived unannounced with a manila folder and that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mom, we need to talk about your finances," she said, settling into the chair across from me like she owned the place. "You're getting older, and I worry about you managing all those accounts alone." The way she said older made my skin crawl, like I was a problem to be solved, rather than the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for her college education. "I can handle my own money, dear," I replied, watching her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "But what if something happens? What if you forget to pay bills? What if someone takes advantage of you?" Her voice carried that patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being clever. She slid the papers across my kitchen table, the same table where Thomas and I had shared coffee every morning for 45 years. "It's just a simple power of attorney, for emergencies only." I picked up the documents, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. 47 years of reading medical charts had taught me to notice details others missed. The paperwork wasn't just for emergencies. It gave her complete control over everything I owned. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Time?" Veronica's mask slipped for just a second, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Mom, you don't have time. Your memory is getting worse." That was the first lie I caught her in. My memory was sharp as ever. I could recite medication, dosages I'd memorized 20 years ago, remember the exact dates of every patient I'd lost, recall word-for-word conversations from decades past. "My memory is fine, Veronica." "Is it? Because last week you called me Patricia. And you left the stove on twice that I know of." Another lie. I'd never called her Patricia, and I'd been obsessively careful about the stove ever since Thomas died. The fact that she was fabricating incidents meant she was building a case against me. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. For a moment, her expression twisted into something I'd never seen before, pure rage mixed with frustration. Then the mask snapped back into place. "Of course, Mom. I'm sorry if I pushed too hard. I just love you so much, and I want to protect you." After she left, I sat in that kitchen until the sun set completely. Thomas's empty chair seemed to mock me from across the table. What would he think if he knew our only child was planning to rob me blind? That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to an electronics store and bought something I'd never thought I'd need, a tiny digital recorder, no bigger than a matchbox. The young man behind the counter looked at me strangely. "It's for recording my doctor's appointments," I lied, smoothly. Sometimes I forget what they tell me. 3 days later, Veronica returned with reinforcements, a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Webb. "Mrs. Williams, your daughter is concerned about some cognitive decline she's noticed," he said, not bothering to look at me while he spoke. I'd hidden the recorder in the fruit bowl on my counter, positioned perfectly to catch every word. "What kind of decline?" I asked, genuinely curious about what lies they'd concocted. "Confusion about dates, leaving appliances on, calling people by the wrong names," Veronica interjected, her voice heavy with fake sorrow. "And when did this allegedly start happening?" Dr. Webb looked up sharply at my use of the word allegedly. I'd spent decades dealing with doctors who thought nurses were beneath them. I knew exactly how to make them uncomfortable. "According to your daughter, these episodes have been increasing in frequency over the past 6 months. "Interesting," I said, pulling out my smartphone, "because I keep detailed notes about my daily activities. Would you like me to read them?" The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica's face went pale, but Dr. Webb leaned forward with renewed interest. "That's actually concerning, Mrs. Williams. Obsessive note-taking can be a sign of anxiety related to memory loss." This man was going to pathologize everything I did. No matter how sharp I proved myself to be, he'd find a way to twist it into evidence of decline. "I see," I said calmly. "And what would you recommend?" "A brief evaluation period. Somewhere safe, where we can monitor your condition and adjust your medications." My blood turned to ice. Medications. They were planning to drug me into submission. "What kind of medications?" "Nothing dramatic. Just something to help with the confusion and agitation." After they left, I played back the recording. The conversation sounded different when you could hear the pauses, the way Veronica's voice changed when she thought she was winning. But the real revelation came later that evening. I was washing dishes when I heard a notification ping from my phone. Veronica had sent me a text. "Thanks for being so understanding, Mom. This is the right choice." But she'd made a mistake. The message was part of a group chat, and I could see other participants, Marcus and someone named Janet. My hands shaking, I scrolled up to read the earlier messages. "Marcus, she's sharper than you said." "This won't be easy, Veronica. Just stick to the script. I told you she gets confused." Janet, "How long do you need me to keep her sedated?" Veronica, "Long enough to transfer everything and sell the house. Maybe 6 months. Marcus, "The documents are ready. Once she's admitted, you'll have full medical and financial power of attorney." Janet, "And my payment?" Veronica, $50K when it's done. Cash, like we agreed." I dropped my phone, and it clattered against the kitchen floor. My own daughter had hired someone named Janet to keep me drugged. She was planning to steal my house, my money, everything Thomas and I had worked for. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail about her mother. I wasn't just any 74-year-old woman. I was a registered nurse who'd spent decades fighting for patients' rights, documenting abuse, and standing up to doctors who thought they could intimidate me. And I'd just recorded every word of their conspiracy. The next morning, I called Seattle General Hospital and asked to speak with the head of nursing. "This is Odette Williams. I worked there from 1978 to 2019. I need to report suspected medical fraud and elder abuse." "Mrs. Williams, of course I remember you. What can I help you with?" "I need you to connect me with someone who specializes in prosecuting healthcare fraud. And I need it today." "Is this about a patient?" "Yes," I said, looking at my reflection in the hallway mirror. "It's about me." That afternoon, I met with Detective Sarah Chen at a coffee shop downtown. She was younger than Veronica, but had the same sharp eyes I'd developed after decades of spotting drug seekers and manipulative relatives. "Mrs. Williams, these are serious allegations. Do you have any proof?" I placed my phone on the table between us and hit play. As Veronica's voice filled the small space, cold, calculating, discussing my sedation like I was livestock to be managed, Detective Chen's expression hardened. "Mrs. Williams, we're going to need you to be very brave. Are you willing to wear a wire?" I thought about Thomas, about how he'd always said I was tougher than I looked. "Detective, I've been fighting bullies my entire career. My daughter is just another one." The next week, armed with a recording device that made my fruit bowl recorder look like a toy, I invited Veronica and Dr. Webb back to my house. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told them, letting my voice shake just slightly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help." I watched Veronica's eyes light up with greedy satisfaction. "Oh, Mom, I'm so relieved." "A perfect facility, Doctor." "Before we proceed," Dr. Webb said, pulling out an iPad, "I'll need you to sign these updated documents. For your protection, of course." I pretended to read them, occasionally nodding or asking innocent questions, while the device recorded everything. The papers were even worse than I'd expected. They gave Veronica immediate access to all my accounts and authorized the sale of my property. "This seems like a lot of paperwork for a simple evaluation," I said. "It's standard procedure," Dr. Webb assured me. "Nothing to worry about." "And Janet will be my nurse?" They exchanged glances. They hadn't mentioned Janet's name to me before. "How? Do you know about Janet?" Veronica asked carefully. "You mentioned her last time." "No, I didn't." The room went dead quiet. I could hear the clock ticking on my mantel, the same clock Thomas had bought me for our 20th anniversary. "Maybe I'm more confused than I thought," I said with a little laugh. "Who is Janet again?" "Just a very qualified private nurse," Dr. Webb said, sweat beading on his forehead. "And she'll make sure I'm comfortable? Not over-medicated?" "Of course," Veronica said quickly. "We would never—" "Never what?" "Never want you to be uncomfortable. I signed the papers with my maiden name, something any competent doctor would have noticed and questioned." Dr. Webb didn't even glance at the signature. 2 days later, Detective Chen called me. "Mrs. Williams, we've arrested Dr. Webb and this Janet person. Her real name is Janet Morrison, by the way. She's a former nurse who lost her license for drug theft. Your daughter hired her to keep you heavily sedated. What happens now?" "Now we arrest your daughter. Are you ready?" I thought about 47 years of night shifts, of holding dying patients' hands, of fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I thought about Thomas, who'd always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. I've been ready my whole life. They came for her on a Tuesday morning, just as she was leaving her yoga class. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Chen told me later that Veronica actually tried to claim I was having a psychotic episode, and that the recordings were fabricated. The recordings, along with the text messages and financial documents Dr. Webb had prepared, told a different story. But the moment that truly changed everything came 3 weeks later, in the courtroom where my future would be decided. I sat in that courtroom on December 18th, 2024, watching my daughter's face crumble as the prosecutor played the recordings for everyone to hear. Her voice echoed through the chamber, cold and calculating. "Just stick to the script." I told you she gets confused. But let me take you back to how I discovered the full scope of their conspiracy, because what I found that October evening was so much worse than simple greed. It was 11:47 p.m. when my phone buzzed again. Another WhatsApp. Notification from that group chat Veronica had accidentally included me in. My hands were still shaking from reading about Janet's plan to keep me sedated, but I forced myself to scroll up further into their conversation history. What I found made my stomach lurch so violently I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. Veronica. The house appraisal came back at $340,000. Plus her accounts, we're looking at $1.3 million total. Marcus. My fee is $200K, non-negotiable. Janet. And mine is $50K for 6 months of keeping her quiet. Veronica. Fine. That still leaves me over $1 million to start fresh. Start fresh. As if I was just an obstacle to be removed, not the woman who'd raised her, fed her, loved her unconditionally for 37 years. But the next message made my blood freeze completely. Marcus. What if she fights the commitment? Veronica. She won't. But if she does, Janet knows how to handle difficult patients. A little extra sedation, maybe a fall down some stairs. Accidents happen in psychiatric facilities. They weren't just planning to rob me. They were planning to kill me if I became inconvenient. I sat on my bathroom floor, the cold tiles pressing against my legs, and felt something inside me break apart and reassemble into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. For 47 years, I'd been a healer. Now, I was going to become something else entirely. The next morning, I called in every favor I'd accumulated during my nursing career. First, I contacted Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the chief of psychiatry at Seattle General. Odette, it's wonderful to hear from you, she said warmly. How are you enjoying retirement? Patricia, I need a favor. A big one. I think someone is trying to have me committed fraudulently. The line went quiet for several seconds. Odette, that's a very serious accusation. Who would do such a thing? My daughter. Jesus Christ. Do you have proof? I have recordings, and I need you to help me prove I'm mentally competent before they try to lock me away. An hour later, I was sitting in Dr. Hernandez's office, taking every cognitive test she could throw at me. Memory recall, pattern recognition, mathematical reasoning, logical sequencing. I passed everything with scores that would have impressed her even 30 years ago. Odette, your cognitive function is exceptional for any age, let alone 74. I'll document everything, but I have to ask, what exactly are you planning? I'm planning to destroy them before they destroy me. That afternoon, I called Detective Chen again. Mrs. Williams, I've been thinking about your case. We need more evidence before we can make arrests. I have more evidence, I said, and played her the new recordings about Janet's willingness to cause accidents. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mrs. Williams, this just became a conspiracy to commit murder. We need to move fast. How fast? We arrest them tomorrow, or we might lose you forever. But Veronica didn't give us until tomorrow. That evening, just as I was heating up leftover soup for dinner, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Veronica standing on my porch with 2 men I didn't recognize. One wore scrubs, the other a security uniform. My phone buzzed with a text. Mom, we're here to take you somewhere safe. Please don't make this difficult. I had 2 choices. Run or face them with the wire Detective Chen had given me that morning. I chose to fight. Coming, dear, I called sweetly, adjusting the tiny recording device hidden in my cardigan. When I opened the door, Veronica's smile looked like it had been painted on with a knife. Mom, this is Michael. She gestured to the man in scrubs. And this is Officer Rodriguez. They're here to help. Officer Rodriguez wasn't a real police officer. I could tell by the way his uniform didn't quite fit, and how he avoided making eye contact. Michael, the fake nurse, kept checking his phone like he was waiting for instructions. Help with what exactly? I asked. You've been having episodes, Mom. Forgetting things, getting confused. We're worried about your safety. I feel perfectly clear right now. That's common with your condition, Michael said, speaking for the first time. His voice had the practiced tone of someone who'd done this before. Patients often have lucid moments between episodes. Patients, not people, not Mrs. Williams. Just patients to be managed. What kind of episodes? I pressed. You called 911 yesterday, Veronica said. Told them someone was trying to break into your house. But when they arrived, there was nobody here. Another lie. I hadn't called 911 in over 6 months. You also went to the bank and tried to withdraw all your money, Michael added. The teller was concerned enough to call Adult Protective Services. And another lie. I'd been to the bank exactly once in the past month to deposit a small check. I think there's been some mistake, I said calmly. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be, Veronica said, stepping closer. We have legal authority to take you for evaluation. She pulled out a folded document. At the top, I could see the words, Emergency Psychiatric Hold. May I read that? Of course, but we do need to leave soon. The facility is expecting us. I scanned the paperwork, noting the forged signatures, the fabricated incidents, the medical recommendations from Dr. Webb. It was a masterpiece of fraud, detailed enough to fool most people. This says I threatened to hurt myself. When did I allegedly do that? Tuesday night, Michael said. You called your daughter and said you couldn't live without your husband anymore. That was the most insulting lie yet. Yes, I miss Thomas every day, but I'd never been suicidal. I had too much fight left in me. I see, I said, handing the papers back. And where exactly will you be taking me? Peaceful Meadows, Veronica said. It's a lovely place. Very calm, very quiet. And Janet will be my nurse there? The three of them exchanged glances sharp enough to cut glass. How do you know about Janet? Officer Rodriguez asked, speaking for the first time. Because she's been texting me, I lied smoothly. Asking about my medical history, my allergies, what medications make me drowsy. Michael's face went pale. She shouldn't be contacting you directly. Why not? Because... He started, then stopped. Because what? Because it's not protocol, Veronica said quickly. Interesting. What is protocol for keeping someone sedated against their will? The silence that followed was so thick I could hear my neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. Mom, you're getting confused again, Veronica said, but her voice had lost all its false warmth. Am I? Because Janet texted me very specific instructions about how to prepare for the drugs she'll be giving me. She seemed particularly interested in my tolerance for benzodiazepines. Officer Rodriguez kept looking toward the street like he wanted to run. Maybe we should reschedule, Michael said. No, Veronica snapped. We're doing this now. Veronica, I said, using the voice I'd perfected, for dealing with difficult families in the ICU, are you really going to force your own mother into a psychiatric facility based on lies? I'm not forcing anything. I'm trying to save your life. From what? From yourself. And after you save me, what happens to my house, my money, my life insurance? Her mask finally slipped completely. The fake concern vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. You won't need any of that where you're going. That's when I knew Detective Chen had been right. This wasn't just theft. This was erasure. They wanted to make me disappear so completely that even I would forget who I used to be. But what they didn't know was that every word they'd spoken had been recorded, and Detective Chen was listening to everything from her car parked 2 blocks away. Well then, I said, stepping back from my doorway, I suppose you'll have to drag me out kicking and screaming. Veronica's eyes narrowed. If that's what it takes. She nodded to Michael and Officer Rodriguez. They moved toward me with the confidence of people who'd done this before, who'd dragged other elderly victims from their homes and delivered them to places where their screams would never be heard. But I wasn't other elderly victims. I was Odette Williams, and I was done being their victim. The next 30 seconds changed everything. As Michael and fake Officer Rodriguez stepped toward me, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for. Car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps on my front. A porch. Seattle Police Department. Step away from Mrs. Williams. Detective Chen's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Behind her, I could see 2 uniformed officers, their hands resting on their weapons. Michael froze mid-step. Officer Rodriguez actually turned and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go with real police blocking both ends of my porch. Veronica's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion, terror, and finally, pure rage directed straight at me. You set us up, she whispered. No, sweetheart, I said calmly. You set yourselves up. I just recorded it. Detective Chen stepped into my house, her badge clearly visible. Veronica Williams, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, elder abuse, and fraud. This is insane! Veronica shrieked as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She's senile. She's confused. You can't believe anything she says. Ma'am, we have recordings of you planning to sedate your mother against her will and steal her assets. We also have evidence that you hired an unlicensed individual to potentially harm her. Michael and the fake officer were arrested within minutes. As they led Veronica away, she turned back to look at me one last time. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed. No idea what's coming. Detective Chen waited until the patrol. Cars disappeared before speaking again. Mrs. Williams, we need to talk. This is bigger than we thought. Over the next 2 hours, sitting in my kitchen with cups of coffee growing cold between us, Detective Chen laid out everything they'd discovered during their investigation. When we started digging into Dr. Webb's background, she said, pulling out a thick file, we found something disturbing. He's done this before, at least 6 times in the past 4 years. My blood chilled. Other elderly people? Elderly people with substantial assets and children who were willing to pay for his services. The pattern is always the same: fake psychiatric evaluations, fraudulent commitments, and then the victims disappear into facilities where they're kept heavily medicated until they die. How many are still alive? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Mrs. Williams, your daughter didn't just hire Dr. Webb. She hired Janet Morrison, and Janet has a very specific skill set. Detective Chen opened another folder, revealing Janet's photograph and criminal history. Janet Morrison, age 43, former registered nurse, lost her license in 2019 for stealing fentanyl from the hospital where she worked. Since then, she's been working off the books for people who need elderly relatives to have accidents. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. How many accidents? We've identified at least 4 suspicious deaths at facilities where Janet worked as a private nurse. All elderly patients, all with substantial inheritances, all supposedly died from falls or medication errors. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. Detective, are you telling me my daughter hired a serial killer? We're telling you that Janet Morrison has been paid to eliminate elderly patients who became inconvenient for their families, and your daughter paid her $50,000 to make sure you never left that psychiatric facility alive. The weight of that revelation hit me like a physical blow. My own child, the baby I'd carried for 9 months, the toddler I'd rocked through countless nightmares, the teenager I'd driven to soccer practice and piano lessons, had paid someone to murder me. But Detective Chen wasn't finished. There's more, Mrs. Williams. When we searched Dr. Webb's office, we found files on 17 other potential victims. Your daughter gave him a list of elderly people in the area who might be good targets. A list? Names, addresses, estimated net worth, family situations. Mrs. Williams, your daughter was recruiting victims for Dr. Webb's operation. My hands clenched into fists. Bad enough that she'd planned to destroy me, but she'd been hunting other elderly people like animals. Who else was on the list? Detective Chen hesitated. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. The widow down the street. Mrs. Chen, no relation to me. The elderly man who runs the corner grocery store. 12 others. I thought of sweet Mrs. Patterson, who brought me homemade cookies every Christmas. Of Mrs. Chen, who always smiled and waved when she walked her. Little dog past my house. Of Mr. Gonzalez at the grocery store, who still called me Miss Odette and asked about my health every time I shopped there. Veronica had been planning to feed them all to this monster. Detective, what can I do to help? Right now, we need you to stay safe while we build our case. Dr. Webb is still out there, and so are the people who've been paying him. This conspiracy goes deeper than just your daughter. The next morning brought the first of 3 revelations that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. I was sorting through Thomas's old papers, something I'd been avoiding. For 2 years since his death, when I found a life insurance policy I'd never seen before. Not the $200,000 policy I'd used to pay for his funeral and settle his debts, but a second policy for $500,000 that had been taken out just 6 months before he died. The beneficiary was listed as Veronica Williams. I called the insurance company immediately. Mrs. Williams, yes, I show that policy here. It was purchased by your daughter in March 2022. She listed herself as the sole beneficiary, with a rider stating that the money would be used for your care in the event of your husband's death. Did my husband know about this policy? According to our records, he signed the application, but the monthly premiums were paid by your daughter. Thomas had never mentioned a second life insurance policy. He'd been meticulous about our finances, discussing every major decision with me. The idea that he'd hidden a $500,000 policy was impossible, unless he hadn't known what he was signing. I drove to our family doctor's office that afternoon. Dr. Patricia Kowalski had been treating Thomas and me for over 15 years. If anyone would remember details about his final months, it would be her. "Odette, it's wonderful to see you," Dr. Kowalski said, embracing me warmly. "How are you holding up?" "Patricia, I need to ask you about Thomas's health in the months before. He died." "Was there anything unusual?" Her expression grew concerned. "Unusual how?" "Memory problems, confusion, anything that might have affected his judgment." "Well, now that you mention it, he did come in several times complaining of episodes where he felt disoriented, but all his tests came back normal." "What kind of episodes?" "He said he'd have periods where he felt foggy, like he was thinking through molasses. It usually happened after he'd been to lunch with Veronica." My blood turned to ice. "He had lunch with Veronica regularly?" "Oh yes, she was so attentive those last few months. She'd bring him to appointments, help him with paperwork. I remember thinking how lucky you were to have such a devoted daughter." "Devoted? Or calculating?" "Dr. Kowalski, is it possible Thomas was being drugged?" "Drugged?" "Odette, that's a very serious accusation. I know it sounds crazy, but I need to know. Could someone have been giving him something that would make him confused and compliant?" Dr. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. "There are medications that could cause those symptoms. Benzodiazepines, certain sleep aids, even some over-the-counter. Drugs if given in the right doses. Would they show up in an autopsy? Not necessarily, especially if they were administered sporadically and the person died of natural causes." "Thomas died of a heart attack, Odette. There was no reason to test for anything unusual." I left Dr. Kowalski's office with a horrible suspicion growing in my chest. Thomas hadn't just died of a heart attack. He'd been systematically drugged into signing documents he didn't understand, including a life insurance policy that would give Veronica $500,000, perfecting her technique before she moved on to me. The second revelation came 3 days later, when Detective Chen called with information that made my knees buckle. "Mrs. Williams, we've been investigating your daughter's finances, and we found something that changes everything." "What is it?" "She's been planning this for over 2 years. We found bank records showing she's been paying Dr. Webb a monthly retainer since January 2022. January 2022. 2 months before Thomas's mysterious confusion episodes started. Detective, I think my daughter killed my husband." "That's what we're starting to think too. We're requesting an exhumation order." The words hit me like a physical blow. They were going to dig up Thomas's body, my beloved husband who'd been resting peacefully for 2 years because our daughter had murdered him for money. "Mrs. Williams, there's more. We found communications between your daughter and Dr. Webb dating back 18 months. They weren't just planning to commit you. They were planning to use you as a test case for a much larger operation." "What do you mean?" "They were going to perfect their method on you, then expand to commit elderly people all over the Pacific Northwest. Your daughter was going to be Dr. Webb's business partner, recruiting victims and splitting the profits." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, the same chair where I'd eaten breakfast with Thomas every morning for 45 years. How much money were they planning to steal? Based on their target list, approximately $12 million from 17 different families. $12 million. 17 families destroyed. 17 elderly people drugged, stolen from, and potentially murdered. All because my daughter had decided that other people's lives were worth less than her greed. But the third revelation, which came on a cold Tuesday morning in November, was the one that nearly broke me completely. Detective Chen arrived at my house with a laptop and a grim expression. "Mrs. Williams, we searched Dr. Webb's computer and found video files. I need to warn you, what I'm about to show you is going to be very difficult to watch." "Show me." The video was filmed in what looked like a psychiatric facility room. The quality was poor, but I could make out a figure in the bed. An elderly woman, thin and frail, with tubes running from her arms. "This was taken at Peaceful Meadows, the facility where they were planning to take you," Detective Chen said quietly. As the camera zoomed in, I could see the woman's face more clearly. She was conscious but barely responsive, her eyes unfocused, and glassy. "Her name was Margaret Foster," Detective Chen continued. "She was 72 years old, committed by her son 6 months ago for alleged dementia." "What happened to her?" "Janet Morrison was her private nurse. This video was taken the day before Margaret died from what was officially ruled an accidental overdose." The camera panned to show Janet Morrison standing beside the bed, adjusting something on the IV drip. Even in the grainy footage, I could see her checking the woman's pulse, then increasing whatever medication was flowing into her veins. "This is a murder being recorded," I whispered. "Yes, and we found 17 similar videos on Dr. Webb's computer. Mrs. Williams, they were documenting their kills, probably for their own protection in case one of their partners tried to blackmail them." I watched in horror as Janet Morrison calmly administered what was clearly a lethal dose of medication to Margaret Foster, a woman who looked exactly like me, elderly, vulnerable, and completely helpless. "That would have been me," I said, my voice barely audible. "Yes, in exactly the same room, with exactly the same method." I closed the laptop, unable to watch anymore. "Detective, I want to help you catch every single person involved in this. Every doctor, every nurse, every family member who paid for these murders." "Mrs. Williams, that could be dangerous. These people have killed at least 17 elderly individuals for money. They won't hesitate to come after you." "Let them come," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I've spent my entire career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. It's time to finish the job." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Detective Chen and the FBI to set up a sting operation that would expose the entire conspiracy. They fitted me with sophisticated recording equipment and taught me how to elicit confessions from the remaining conspirators. The plan was simple. I would pretend to be interested in Dr. Webb's services, not as a victim, but as someone who wanted to have a relative committed. We'd arranged for me to meet with him under the pretense that I had a wealthy sister who was becoming inconvenient. "Remember, Mrs. Williams," Detective Chen said as she adjusted the tiny camera hidden in my brooch, "we need him to explicitly discuss the murder-for-hire aspect of his operation. Get him to talk about Janet's special services." "I understand. And if at any point you feel unsafe, use the code word comfortable and we'll move in immediately." I looked at myself in the mirror of the FBI surveillance van. At 74 years old, I was about to become an undercover agent in a murder investigation. Thomas would have been proud. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. at a coffee shop downtown. Dr. Webb had agreed to meet with Margaret Patterson, the false identity the FBI had created for me, to discuss family care options. As I walked into that coffee shop, wearing a wire and carrying the weight of 17 murdered elderly people on my shoulders, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I felt powerful. Dr. Webb was sitting in a corner booth, looking exactly like what he was, a predator in an expensive suit. When he saw me, he stood and extended his hand with a smile that made my skin crawl. Mrs. Patterson, thank you for coming. I understand you have a family situation that needs our special attention. Dr. Webb, I hope you can help me. My sister is becoming quite a problem. As I sat down across from him, I thought about Margaret Foster, about Mrs. Chen walking her little dog, about sweet Mrs. Patterson with her Christmas cookies. I thought about Thomas, confused and drugged in his final months, signing papers he didn't understand. And I thought about every elderly person in Seattle who was sleeping peacefully tonight, unaware that there were monsters like Dr. Webb hunting them. Tell me about your sister, Dr. Webb said, opening a leather portfolio. I smiled the same sweet, helpless smile I'd been perfecting for weeks. Well, doctor, she has far too much money and not nearly enough sense. I was hoping you could help me solve both problems. Dr. Webb leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the kind of predatory interest I'd seen in 47 years of dealing with people who viewed patients as profit margins. Mrs. Patterson, you mentioned your sister has substantial assets? Oh, yes, I said, adjusting my purse so the hidden camera had a clear view of his face. About $1.2 million in various accounts, plus a beautiful house worth at least $400,000. And she's become difficult to manage? Impossible. She questions everything, wants to see all her financial statements, even hired her own accountant. Very paranoid behavior. Dr. Webb nodded knowingly. Classic signs of developing dementia. The paranoia often manifests as distrust of family members who are only trying to help. Exactly. I've been telling people for months that she needs professional care, but she refuses to listen to reason. How old is your sister? 76. A widow, no children. I'm her only living relative. I watched his pupils dilate slightly. In his mind, he was already calculating percentages. Mrs. Patterson, I think we can definitely help your family situation. I work with a team of specialists who understand these delicate matters. What kind of specialists? Psychiatric evaluators who can provide the necessary documentation for emergency commitment. We also have private nurses who specialize in caring for difficult patients. Private nurses? Yes, sometimes elderly patients require intensive monitoring, especially those who might be inclined to resist their treatment. My blood chilled, but I kept my voice steady. What happens if she continues to resist? Dr. Webb glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned closer. Mrs. Patterson, sometimes these patients become so agitated that they hurt themselves. Falls, medication errors, unfortunate accidents. It's very sad, but it does happen. And then the family can grieve in peace, knowing their loved one is no longer suffering. There it was, a confession to murder for hire recorded in crystal clear digital audio. Doctor, how much would this kind of comprehensive care cost? For the type of situation you're describing, with the assets involved, I would estimate $300,000. That includes evaluation, commitment, facility costs, and specialized nursing care for however long it takes. However long, what takes? His smile was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. However long it takes for your sister to find peace. I reached for my phone, pretending to check the time. Dr. Webb, I'm very interested in your services. Could you show me some documentation? References from other families you've helped? Of course. He opened his leather portfolio and pulled out a tablet. I have some testimonials here, though for privacy reasons, the names have been changed. As he scrolled through the tablet, I caught glimpses of photos, elderly people in hospital beds, all looking vacant and over-medicated. This was Eleanor, he said, showing me a picture of a woman who looked exactly like Margaret Foster from the video. Her nephew was concerned about her increasing paranoia 6 months of intensive care before she peacefully passed away. She died? Very peacefully. No suffering at all. And her nephew inherited everything? After our fees were deducted, yes, he was very grateful for our help during such a difficult time. I pretended to study the photos while the camera in my brooch recorded everything. Dr. Webb, the nurse you mentioned, the one who provides intensive monitoring, Is she available to meet with me? Janet? Absolutely. She's our most experienced specialist. He pulled out his phone. I can call her right now. That would be wonderful. He dialed a number and put the phone on speaker. Janet, it's Marcus. I'm here with a potential client who might need your special services. How special? A woman's voice asked. Very special. A 1.6 million situation. Interesting. How quickly does the client need resolution? Dr. Webb looked at me. Mrs. Patterson, do you have a timeline preference? Well, the sooner the better. My sister is already suspicious about my interest in her finances. Did you hear that, Janet? Dr. Webb said into the phone. I heard. I can start immediately. My usual rate for urgent situations is $75,000. And your usual timeline? For that amount? 2 weeks maximum. 1 week if the client prefers a more dramatic resolution. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to continue. What does dramatic resolution mean? Janet's laugh was like ice cracking. Honey, some families want it to look natural. Heart attack, stroke, medication interaction. Others want it to look like an accident. Falls downstairs, drowning in the bathtub, house fire. Dramatic costs extra, but it's usually worth it for the insurance benefits. I felt bile rise in my throat, but Detective Chen's voice echoed in my head. Get them to be specific. Janet, have you ever had a situation where the patient fought back? Oh, sweetheart, they all fight at first. That's why I use the special cocktail, a little fentanyl, a little propofol, maybe some succinylcholine if they're really stubborn. They go quiet real fast. Dr. Webb was nodding approvingly. Janet has never had a patient who didn't eventually cooperate. Because dead people can't complain, Janet added, and both of them laughed. I reached into my purse as if looking for my wallet, but instead I pulled out my real phone. Dr. Webb, before we proceed, I want to show you something. Of course. I opened my banking app and turned the screen toward him. As you can see, I have the resources to pay your fees. His eyes widened as he saw the account balance. $980,000. Mrs. Patterson, that's quite substantial. Yes, and there's something else you should know. I paused, letting the moment build. My name isn't Margaret Patterson. The color drained from his face. I'm sorry? My name is Odette Williams, and that money you're looking at? That's the money my daughter Veronica tried to steal when she hired you to have me killed. Dr. Webb dropped his tablet. Janet's voice was still coming through the phone. Marcus? Marcus, what's happening? You see, Dr. Webb, I've been recording everything. Your confession to 17 murders, Janet's description of her methods, your fee structure for killing elderly people. He tried to stand, but his legs seemed to have stopped working. And right about now, I continued calmly, the FBI agents who have been listening to every word are going to come through that door. As if on cue, the coffee shop door exploded open. Detective Chen entered first, followed by 4 FBI agents in tactical gear. Dr. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and wire fraud. Dr. Webb's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Janet was screaming something through the phone, but Detective Chen quickly confiscated it. Janet Morrison, if you're listening, we're coming for you next, Detective Chen said into the phone before ending the call. As they cuffed Dr. Webb, I stood up and walked over to him. This man who had murdered 17 elderly people for money, who had planned to drug me into oblivion and steal everything Thomas and I had worked for. Dr. Webb, I said quietly, do you remember what you told me about patients who resist treatment? He looked up at me with eyes full of terror. You said they all stop fighting eventually, but you forgot something important. What? You forgot that some of us spent our entire careers fighting bullies like you. And we don't stop. We don't give up. We don't go quietly. The FBI agents began reading him his rights, but I wasn't finished. 17 families, Dr. Webb. 17 elderly people who trusted their relatives, who thought they were safe in their own homes. Margaret Foster, Eleanor Patterson, Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Gonzalez. I know all their names now. Tears were streaming down his face, but I felt no pity. And my husband Thomas, who you helped my daughter drug and manipulate in his final months. You took his dignity, his clarity, his ability to protect me from what was coming. Detective Chen put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Williams, we have what we need. No, I said, stepping closer to Dr. Webb. I need him to understand something. I leaned down so that my face was level with his. For 47 years, I held the hands of dying patients. I comforted families who were losing their loved ones. I fought to give people dignity in their final moments. You stole that from 17 families. You turned death into a business transaction. He tried to speak, but I cut him off. Don't. You don't get to defend yourself. You don't get to explain or justify or ask for mercy. You're going to prison for the rest of your life, and every day you spend there, I want you to remember the names of the people you murdered. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. Mrs. Williams, he whispered, please. My name, I said with ice-cold precision, is Nurse Williams, and you just learned what happens when you try to hurt my patients. The coffee shop had emptied except for FBI agents and crime scene technicians. Detective Chen sat down across from me at the table where I'd just taken down a serial killer. Mrs. Williams, how do you feel? I thought about that question for a long moment. How did I feel? I feel like I finally finished a job I started 47 years ago. What job is that? Protecting vulnerable people from predators who think they're easy targets. Detective Chen smiled. Mrs. Williams, thanks to your courage, we've identified at least 12 other victims who are still alive in various facilities. We're going to get them out and arrest the family members who put them there. And Janet? We arrested her 20 minutes ago at her apartment. She was packing to flee the country. What about Veronica? Your daughter is looking at life in prison without parole. Murder for hire, conspiracy, elder abuse, fraud. The charges keep piling up. I nodded, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months, complete and total peace. Detective, I have one more request. Anything. I want to visit the families of the people Dr. Webb murdered. I want to tell them what really happened to their loved ones. They deserve to know the truth. Mrs. Williams, that could be very difficult. Some of these families participated in the murders. Then they deserve to face the truth even more. As we walked out of that coffee shop together, I felt Thomas's presence beside me, proud and approving. We'd gotten justice not just for us, but for 17 innocent people who had died because their families valued money more than love. But more importantly, we'd saved the 12 who were still alive, and that made every terrifying moment worth it. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the Williams Home for Justice, watching sunrise paint the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and pink through windows that had never known bars or locks or the smell of institutional disinfectant. The transformation wasn't just in the 3-story Victorian house I'd purchased with my savings, or in the 12 elderly residents who now called it home. The transformation was in me. Gone was the gray-haired woman who'd worn shapeless cardigans and kept her eyes down when walking through grocery stores. My hair was shorter now, cut in soft layers with auburn highlights that caught the morning light. I wore a navy blue dress that actually fit my body instead of hiding it, comfortable white sneakers that didn't apologize for taking up space, and glasses with modern frames that made me look like the professional I'd always been. But the biggest change was in my posture. For the first time in years, I stood straight, shoulders back, chin raised. I looked like a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't let anyone convince her otherwise. "Good morning, Odette," called Margaret Foster. Yes, the same Margaret Foster, whose murder I'd watched on Dr. Webb's computer. She was very much alive, sitting at our breakfast table with a cup of coffee and this morning's crossword puzzle. When we'd rescued her from Peaceful Meadows, she'd been skeletal, barely conscious, and so heavily medicated she couldn't remember her own name. Now she was gaining weight, her eyes were bright and alert, and she'd appointed herself the house's unofficial social director. "Morning, Margaret. Sleep well?" "Like a baby. No nightmares about needles or that horrible Janet woman." Janet Morrison had been sentenced to life in prison without parole for 17 counts of first-degree murder. During her trial, she'd confessed to 12 additional killings that we hadn't even known about. 29 elderly people dead because their families valued inheritance money more than human life. "Any word on the Peterson trial?" asked Harold. "Chen, Mr. Chen from the corner grocery store, who'd been on Veronica's target," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot Margaret always had ready by 6 a.m. "Detective Chen thinks they'll get the conviction. The Peterson case was one of 14 families we'd helped prosecute for elder abuse and conspiracy to commit murder. Turns out, Dr. Webb's client list was extensive, and once the FBI started digging, they found a network of greed that stretched across 3 states. "What about your Veronica?" Margaret asked gently. I paused, considering how to answer. The pain of saying my daughter's name would probably never completely fade, but it no longer felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Veronica was convicted. On all counts, life in prison without the possibility of parole. During her sentencing, she'd looked directly at me and mouthed the words, "I hate you." I'd mouthed back, "I know," and felt nothing but pity for the woman who'd destroyed her own life for money she'd never get to spend. Dr. Webb had received the same sentence. During his trial, the prosecutor had called him a serial killer in a lab coat, and the description had stuck. He was currently in solitary confinement at a maximum security federal prison, where he'd spend the remaining 30 years of his life thinking about the families he'd destroyed. "Good," Harold said firmly. "Some people don't deserve forgiveness." "No," I agreed, "but some people deserve peace, and that's what we'd built here at the Williams Home for Justice. Not just a place for elderly victims of family betrayal to live safely, but a place where they could rebuild their sense of worth and dignity. Our residents weren't charity cases or victims anymore. Margaret ran our weekly support groups. Harold managed our finances with the precision of someone who'd run a business for 40 years. Eleanor Patterson, Mrs. Patterson from my neighborhood, who'd been targeted but rescued before anything happened, tended our garden and taught cooking classes. We'd created something beautiful from something horrible. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. Standing on my porch was Detective Chen, holding a large manila envelope. "Mrs. Williams, I have good news." "Come in, Sarah. Coffee?" "Please." She followed me into the kitchen, where Margaret and Harold were pretending not to listen while hanging. On every word. "The federal government has approved your victim compensation claim," Detective Chen said, sliding papers across our breakfast table. "The money recovered from Dr. Webb's operation, plus damages from the families who participated. It comes to just over $4 million. Harold whistled low. $4 million? Most of it will go to the victims' families and survivors, I said, quickly. But the portion designated for the Williams home will help us expand. Expand how? Margaret asked. I'd been thinking about this for months. I want to open a second location, maybe a third. Places where elderly people who've been betrayed by their families can find safety and purpose. That's wonderful, Odette, Detective Chen said. You're changing lives. We all are, I corrected, gesturing to Margaret and Harold. Every person who lives here, every story we share, every family we help prosecute, we're all part of something bigger. After Detective Chen left, I walked through the house, checking on our other residents. Mrs. Garcia was teaching watercolor painting to Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Rodriguez was helping Mr. Kim with his physical therapy exercises. Mrs. Walsh was video calling. Her grandchildren, the ones her son had tried to keep away from her before we intervened. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not people united by blood and bound by obligation, but people who chose each other, who protected each other, who lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. That evening, I sat in Thomas's old rocking chair on our front porch, watching. The sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, safe. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the other residents. "Odette, thank you for giving us our lives back." I smiled, typing back, "Thank you for giving me mine." 6 months ago, I'd been a frightened widow whose own daughter had planned to drug me into oblivion and steal everything I'd worked for. Tonight, I was a woman who'd taken down a murder-for-hire ring, saved 12 lives, and built a home where dignity wasn't negotiable. Thomas would have been proud, not just of what I'd accomplished, but of who I'd become. They'd tried to silence me, to erase me, to reduce me to a signature on a document and a number in a bank account. But some people, some women, refused to disappear quietly. And that, I'd learned, makes all the difference in the world.